Mrs. Bennett, you have 30 days to get out. The words were spoken loudly enough for everyone inside the diner to hear. Claire Bennett stood behind the counter, one hand wrapped around a coffee mug, while the man in the expensive grey suit placed a stack of papers beside her cash register. For 28 years, Claire had served coffee from that same counter. She had watched children grow up, couples fall in love, families grieve, and neighbours come together over cheap breakfasts and warm pie. And now a developer was standing in her mother's diner, telling her it was no longer hers. "You don't understand," Claire said quietly. The man smiled. "Oh, I understand perfectly. Your mother left you a restaurant, we bought the property." A few customers lowered their eyes. Someone whispered that Claire should just take the money and leave. Then the developer leaned closer. "You're not a businesswoman, Mrs. Bennett, you're a cook. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Claire looked at the papers again. She almost signed them. Almost. Because there was one detail on the final page that he clearly hadn't noticed. The signature beneath the sale agreement wasn't her mother. And if Claire was right about what that meant, this wasn't an eviction. It was a crime. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're enjoying the story, please subscribe to Velvet Twist Stories so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Claire didn't touch the pen. Instead, she slowly pushed the papers back across the counter. "I'll need time to review this." The man's smile disappeared for half a second. Then it returned. 30 days, he repeated. His name was Daniel Voss. Everyone in town knew him. At 49, Daniel had built Voss Meridian Development into one of the most aggressive real estate companies in the state. He owned hotels, office buildings, shopping centers, and luxury apartment complexes. His face appeared regularly in business magazines. His charity dinners attracted politicians and celebrities. And for the past 6 months, his company had been buying property around Hawthorne Street. Almost every small business owner on the block had received an offer. Some accepted. Some refused. Claire had refused every time. Not because she didn't understand the money. She understood it perfectly. The diner was worth more than it had ever been. But her mother, Rose Bennett, had spent 40 years building the place. And Claire couldn't bring herself to sell the only thing that still felt like her mother was somewhere nearby. Daniel tapped the paperwork with one finger. "You've been given a very generous offer. I didn't ask for one. You're going to regret that." Claire looked at him. "I've regretted very few things in my life." Daniel gave a quiet laugh. "People always say that right before they lose something." He turned toward the door. 2 lawyers followed him. But before he stepped outside, Daniel stopped. He glanced back at Claire's faded apron. 30 days, Mrs. Bennett." Then he smiled. "Try to enjoy them." The door closed behind him. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Martha Reed came out from the kitchen. She was Claire's closest friend and had worked at the diner for nearly 20 years. Martha stared at the papers. "Tell me you didn't sign that." "I didn't." "Good." Claire picked up the document. Martha moved closer. "What did he want?" Claire didn't answer immediately. She was looking at the bottom of the page. At the signature. At the date. At the name of the attorney who had prepared the agreement. Martha noticed the change in her expression. "What is it?" Claire turned the document around. "That's my mother's signature." Martha frowned. "So?" Claire pointed to the date. "Look at when it was signed." Martha leaned closer. Her eyes widened. Claire's mother had supposedly signed the sale agreement on June 17th. Rose Bennett had died on June 14th. 3 days earlier. Martha slowly straightened. "That can't be right." "No." Claire's voice was almost a whisper. "It can't." The diner gradually returned to normal. Plates clattered. Coffee poured. A radio played softly behind the counter. But Claire couldn't hear any of it anymore. She kept staring at the document. Her mother had been dead for 3 years. Claire had signed every legitimate estate document after her death. She knew Rose's handwriting better than she knew her own. The loop of the R, the way she crossed her T's, the small upward curve at the end of her signature. This signature looked close. Very close. But it was Rose's. Claire took a magnifying glass from beneath the counter. Martha watched her carefully. "You think someone forged it?" Claire didn't respond. She placed the original document beside an old birthday card her mother had written years ago. Same name. Same initials. Completely different hand. Claire's stomach tightened. Someone had tried to make the signature look authentic. But whoever had done it had made one mistake. They had assumed nobody would check the date. Claire folded the document. "I need to see the original property records." Martha's expression hardened. "Claire, Daniel Voss didn't come here because he wants your diner." "I know. He's after the whole block." Claire looked through the window. Across the street, a large construction sign stood beside 3 recently purchased buildings. VOSS Meridian, HAWTHORNE redevelopment project. Luxury apartments. Retail space. Private parking. The sign showed smiling families walking through landscaped streets. It looked beautiful. Almost too beautiful. Claire had noticed something strange months earlier. Daniel wasn't buying the most profitable properties. He was buying specific properties. Properties that formed a narrow corridor around the diner. And he had been willing to pay far above market value for some of them. Claire had always assumed there was something she wasn't seeing. Now she knew there was. That evening, Claire stayed at the diner after closing. The lights were dim. The chairs were upside down on the tables. The smell of coffee still lingered in the air. She walked to the framed photograph hanging above the kitchen entrance. Her mother stood in the picture, wearing the same white apron Claire had worn that morning. Rose was smiling. Young Claire stood beside her. 14 years old. Skinny, angry, and holding a basket of peaches. Claire smiled faintly at the memory. Her mother had always said the diner wasn't really about food. "It gives people somewhere to belong," Rose used to say. Claire touched the edge of the frame. "I don't know what you were trying to protect, Mom." She lowered her hand. "But I'm going to find out." The next morning, Claire drove to the county records office. She asked for the original property file. The clerk disappeared into the back room. 10 minutes later, he returned carrying a thick folder. Claire opened it on the counter. Deeds. Tax records. Old maps. Property transfers. Everything seemed ordinary. Until she reached a document dated 26 years earlier. The property surrounding the diner had once belonged to several small owners. But over the years, portions of it had quietly changed hands. Claire recognized some of the names. People who had sold their properties to Daniel. Others had died. Some had moved away. But then Claire noticed something that made her stop. A company name appeared repeatedly in the older records. Bennett Holdings. She stared at it. She had never heard of it. Or at least she thought she hadn't. The clerk looked over. Something wrong. Claire closed the folder. No, but her voice had changed. She took photographs of the records with her phone. Then she asked for everything connected to Bennett Holdings. The clerk disappeared again. When he returned, he carried another file. Thinner, older, covered in dust. Claire opened it. Inside was a certificate bearing her mother's name. And beneath it was another name. Claire Bennett. Her hands went cold. She read it again. Then again. Her name was there. Not as an employee. not as a beneficiary of the diner, as something far more significant. Before Claire could turn the next page, her phone rang. It was Martha. Claire answered. Hello. Martha's voice was tense. Claire, you need to come back to the diner. What happened? Daniel is here. Claire closed the file. What does he want? There was a pause. Then Martha spoke quietly. He brought someone with him. Who? Elliot Grant. Claire froze. Elliot Grant had been her mother's attorney for more than 30 years. He had handled Rose's will. He had helped Claire settle the estate. He had stood beside Claire at her mother's funeral. Claire had trusted him completely. Martha continued. And Claire? What? He's carrying another set of documents. Claire looked down at the old file on the counter. At her mother's name. At her own. Then she looked at the property records again. Something about the entire situation suddenly felt much bigger than a diner. Claire closed the file and stood. Don't let them leave. When Claire returned to the diner, Daniel was sitting in her mother's favorite booth. Elliot sat opposite him. The sight of the two men together made something inside Claire go completely still. Daniel smiled. There she is. Claire walked toward them. Elliot wouldn't look at her. Daniel placed another document on the table. This one should make things easier. Claire didn't sit. What is it? A final settlement. I already told you I'm not selling. Daniel leaned back. You haven't read it. I don't need to. His smile faded. You really should start understanding what you're up against. Claire looked at Elliot. For the first time in 30 years, the man who had always called her young Claire couldn't meet her eyes. Claire noticed. And suddenly, the fear she'd been carrying since the previous morning disappeared. It was replaced by something colder. Something stronger. She reached for the document. Then she saw the signature. And this time, she knew exactly what she was looking at. Someone hadn't simply forged her mother's name. They had forged an entire history. And Claire was about to discover that her mother's diner was only the smallest piece of what had been stolen. The next morning, Claire returned to the county records office before the building was fully open. She had barely slept. The folder she had discovered the day before sat on the passenger seat beside her. Bennett Holdings. Her mother's name. Her names. And a series of property records that seemed to connect the diner to almost the entire block Daniel Voss was trying to acquire. But there was one thing Claire couldn't understand. If her mother had secretly owned these properties, why had she never told Claire? Claire carried the folder inside. I'm looking for the complete file on Bennett Holdings, she told the clerk. The woman behind the desk typed into her computer. That's an old corporation. I know. Most of the records are archived. I need them. The clerk studied Claire's face. Then she disappeared into the back. Minutes later, she returned carrying another box. This is everything we have. Claire opened it. Inside were tax statements, incorporation papers, old correspondence, and property maps. She began sorting through them. Then she found something that made her stop. The map. The diner was marked in red. So were 6 buildings around it. Then Claire noticed something even stranger. A thin black line connected all 7 properties. At the bottom of the map, in her mother's handwriting, were 5 words. Never let them connect these. Claire's heart began pounding. She photographed the map. Then she turned to the clerk. Who else has requested these records recently? The clerk hesitated. Why, please. The woman checked the system. There was a request 3 months ago. Claire's stomach tightened. Who? Voss Meridian Development. Of course. Daniel hadn't suddenly become interested in the diner. He had been looking for something. something her mother had spent years hiding. Claire drove straight to Martha's house. Martha opened the door wearing a robe and holding a cup of tea. One look at Claire's face told her something was wrong. "You found something." Claire walked inside. "My mother owned more than the diner." Martha's expression changed. "I knew she had investments." "How much?" "I don't know." Claire placed the map on the kitchen table. Martha stared at it. Her hand slowly covered her mouth. "I haven't seen that in years." "You've seen this, Martha sat down. "Your mother made me promise never to tell you." Claire's eyes filled with disbelief. "You knew?" "I knew there was something she was protecting. You let me believe she left me a restaurant and nothing else. She wanted you to believe that." "Why?" Martha looked down. "Because she was afraid." The anger in Claire's chest softened. "Afraid of who?" Martha took a long breath. "People who wanted what she had." Claire sat opposite her. "My mother never talked about being afraid." "She did with me." Martha's voice trembled. "About 6 months before she died, your mother told me someone had been following her." Claire went still. "Following her?" She noticed the same car outside the diner, sometimes outside her house. "Did she tell the police?" "No." "Why not?" "Because she didn't trust them." Claire stared at Martha. "What exactly did she say?" Martha looked toward the window. "She said, if they ever come for the diner, don't let Claire sign anything." Claire's eyes narrowed. "Who are they?" Martha shook her head. "She never told me." A silence settled between them. Then Claire remembered the document. The forged signature. The attorney's name. Elliot Grant. "Martha." "Yes." "Did my mother trust Elliot?" Martha hesitated. "Your mother trusted him with everything." Claire looked away. That may have been her mistake. That afternoon, Claire returned to the diner. Daniel was gone. Elliot was still there. He sat alone in a booth, staring at a cup of untouched coffee. Claire walked toward him. "You knew?" Elliot looked up. "Claire, you knew about Bennett Holdings." His face went pale. Claire placed the property map on the table. "You knew my mother owned these properties." Elliot said nothing. "You knew about the trust." Still nothing. Claire's voice hardened. "And you knew that signature was forged." Elliot finally looked away. That was enough. Claire pulled out the chair and sat opposite him. "Tell me the truth." "It's not that simple." "It became simple when you signed documents 3 days after my mother died." Elliot closed his eyes. "Claire, I made mistakes." "You didn't make mistakes." She leaned closer. "You made choices." He swallowed. "Daniel came to me." "When?" "Almost a year ago." "And what did he want?" "Information." "What kind?" "Your mother's property records." Claire stared at him. "Why?" Elliot hesitated. "Because Daniel knew the land was worth far more than anyone realized." Claire's anger returned. "How much?" Elliot didn't answer. "How much, Elliot?" He finally whispered. "More than $100 million." Claire went completely still. The diner suddenly seemed too quiet. Outside, a truck passed along the street. For a moment, Claire could hear nothing but the ticking of the wall clock. Her mother hadn't been protecting a restaurant. She had been protecting an empire of land. And Daniel Voss had known about it. Elliot reached into his briefcase. "I didn't know he planned to take everything." Claire laughed bitterly. "You helped him." "I thought it was a negotiation." "You forged my mother's signature." "I didn't forge it." Claire stared at him. "Then who did?" Elliot looked toward the window. "I don't know." Claire knew he was lying. Do you know? He remained silent. Elliot. His eyes finally met hers. The documents came from someone inside your mother's old company. Claire's face changed. My mother didn't have employees. She did. Claire frowned. Who? Elliot opened his mouth. Before he could answer, the diner door opened. Daniel walked in. 2 men in dark suits followed him. Daniel smiled. I was wondering when you'd start asking questions. Claire stood. You've been following me. Protecting my investment. This isn't your investment. Daniel's smile vanished. You still don't understand. He placed a folder on the counter. Your mother made an agreement. My mother is dead. Exactly. Claire stared at him. Daniel leaned closer. She can't contradict me. The words hit harder than a slap. Martha, standing near the kitchen, stepped forward. Get out. Daniel ignored her. His eyes remained on Claire. You have 2 choices. Take the money and leave peacefully. He tapped the folder. Or fight me. Claire looked at him. And if I fight you? Daniel smiled. You'll lose. Then he walked out. That night, Claire went home and opened the wooden box she had found among her mother's belongings. The brass key inside had no label. She tried it on drawers, cabinets, a small safe in her mother's bedroom. Nothing. Then Claire noticed something. The old photograph hanging above the fireplace. Her mother was standing in front of the diner. Claire lifted the frame. There was a small keyhole behind it. Her hands trembled. She inserted the brass key. Click. A hidden compartment opened inside the wall. Claire stared. Inside was a sealed envelope. Her mother's handwriting was across the front. 4 words. For Claire, only Claire. Claire sat on the floor. For several seconds, she couldn't bring herself to open it. Then she broke the seal. Inside was a letter. My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, someone has finally come for the land. I prayed you would never need to know why I kept these things from you. But if they have come this far, hiding the truth will no longer protect you. Claire's breathing became shallow. She continued, I didn't build Bennett Holdings for myself. I built it because I knew what would happen when this town became valuable. People with money would come. They would promise jobs. They would promise progress. And eventually, they would try to buy the people who refused to sell. Claire wiped a tear from her cheek. Then she reached the final page. Her mother's words became darker. There is only one person outside this family who knows everything. Claire stopped. She read the sentence again. One person. Then she saw the name. Her fingers began to shake. Elliot Grant. Claire lowered the letter. The man who had represented her mother. The man who had handled every legal document. The man she had trusted for 30 years. He knew. But there was another line beneath his name. Claire read it. And this time she couldn't breathe. If Elliot ever tells you he acted alone, don't believe him. The following morning, Claire called Elliot. He didn't answer. She called again. Nothing. Then her phone buzzed. A message. From an unknown number. Stop digging. Claire stared at the screen. Another message appeared. Your mother knew what would happen. Then a final message. She couldn't save the land. Claire's eyes narrowed. She typed, Who are you? The reply came almost immediately. Ask Daniel who owns VOSS Meridian. Claire froze. She had spent the entire week investigating the land. She had never investigated Daniel's company. She opened her laptop. Search the corporate records. Read through the ownership structure. Then she saw something that made her sit back. Voss Meridian Development wasn't entirely owned by Daniel Voss. A private investment company owned the controlling stake. Claire recognized the name. Her mother's company, Bennett Holdings. Claire stared at the screen. No. She opened another document. Then another. The pieces began falling into place. Daniel wasn't buying the land because he wanted to build on it. He needed the land because he couldn't complete the development without it. And there was something else. Something Claire hadn't known. Bennett Holdings wasn't worth a few $1 million. Its assets were worth hundreds of millions. Claire had been the controlling beneficiary since the day her mother died. She simply hadn't known it. Her entire life, she had believed she was protecting a diner. She had never realized. She was the person Daniel Voss had been trying to reach all along. The next morning, Claire walked into Voss Meridian's headquarters. Daniel's assistant looked surprised. "Mr. Voss isn't expecting you." Claire smiled politely. "He should be." The assistant reached for the phone. Claire placed a folder on the desk. "Tell him Claire Bennett is here." The assistant looked down at the folder. Then back at Claire. "What is this?" Claire's voice was calm. "His problem." Daniel entered the lobby several minutes later. He was smiling. Until he saw Claire. Then he noticed the people standing behind her. 3 attorneys. A financial investigator. And an elderly man carrying a leather briefcase. Daniel's expression changed. "Who are they?" Claire looked at him. "You told me I didn't understand how these things worked." She placed a document on the reception desk. Daniel glanced down. His face went pale. Claire continued. "You were right. A beat. I didn't." She smiled faintly. "But I understand now." Daniel picked up the document. His hands tightened around the edges. At the bottom was the ownership statement. The controlling beneficiary. Claire Bennett. Daniel looked up. "That isn't possible." Claire's voice remained quiet. "My mother made sure you would never see this coming." Daniel stared at her. For the first time since he'd walked into the diner, he looked genuinely afraid. But Claire wasn't finished. Because there was still one question she needed answered. Who had been helping Daniel? And she already knew where to find him. Daniel stared at the document in his hand. For the first time since Claire had met him, there was no arrogance in his expression. Only disbelief. "This is fake." Claire didn't move. "You said that about my mother's signature." Daniel looked at the attorneys standing behind her. Then back at Claire. "You don't understand what you're doing." Claire's voice was calm. "I understand exactly what I'm doing." She stepped closer. "You came into my mother's diner and told me I was just a cook." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You tried to make me feel powerless." She placed another document on the desk. "But you made one mistake." Daniel looked down. "You never found out who owned the land." Silence. Then Daniel laughed. "It was forced. You think owning a few properties gives you control." Claire shook her head. "No." She opened the leather briefcase beside her. "I think the documents do." She pulled out the original trust agreement. Then the original property records. Then the corporate records for Bennett Holdings. Daniel's face hardened. Claire continued. "You've spent 6 months buying everything around my mother's diner." She placed another document down. "But you couldn't buy the land you actually needed." Daniel stared at the papers. "Because you never had it." Claire looked directly at him. "I did. A beat. You just didn't know it." Daniel suddenly turned toward his assistant. "Call security." Nobody moved. He looked around. "Did you hear me?" One of Claire's attorneys calmly stepped forward. "Mr. Voss, I wouldn't recommend that." Daniel glared at him. "This is my building." The attorney replied. "Not entirely." Daniel's expression changed. Claire watched him absorb the meaning. The company Daniel had built his reputation on was entangled with investments controlled through Bennett Holdings. And the properties he had spent millions acquiring had never given him the control he thought they did. Claire had been the missing piece. The one person he needed. The one person he had spent months trying to intimidate into surrendering. And now she was standing in front of him with every document he had tried to bury. Daniel lowered his voice. "Who told you?" Claire thought about her mother. The hidden compartment. The letter. The warning. Someone who knew you would eventually make a mistake. Daniel stepped closer. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Claire didn't back away. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with." Then she placed one final folder on the desk. Daniel opened it. Inside were copies of bank transfers. Payments from Voss Meridian to Elliot Grant. Multiple payments. Over several months. Daniel stared at the pages. Claire watched his face. "You paid my mother's attorney." Daniel said nothing. "You paid him to access her property records." Still nothing. "And you paid him to manufacture documents that made it appear my mother sold property after she was already dead." Daniel slammed the folder shut. "You can't prove that." Claire smiled faintly. "That's why I brought this." She turned toward the elderly man who had accompanied her. He opened his leather briefcase. Inside was a small recording device. Daniel's eyes widened. The man's voice was steady. "Your former attorney kept copies of every payment." Daniel looked at Claire. "You've been investigating me." "No." Claire's expression hardened. "I've been investigating what you did to my mother." Later that afternoon, Claire returned to the diner. Elliot was waiting. He looked exhausted. Older than he had the day before. Claire walked toward him. "You should have told me." Elliot looked down. "I was afraid." "Of Daniel." He nodded. Claire sat across from him. "You worked for my mother for 30 years. I know. She trusted you. I know. And you betrayed her." Elliot's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know how to stop it." Claire's voice softened. "You could have told me. I thought if I cooperated, I could protect you." Claire stared at him. "By helping them steal from me." Elliot couldn't answer. Then he reached into his jacket and placed a small envelope on the table. "I found this in your mother's safe." Claire looked at it. "Why didn't you give it to me?" "I was ashamed." Claire picked it up. Her mother's handwriting was on the front. "Give this to Claire when she finally understands." Claire's eyes filled with tears. She opened it. "My darling Claire, if you found this letter, then you finally know what I spent so many years hiding. I'm sorry. I wanted you to have an ordinary life. I wanted you to wake up, go to work, laugh with your friends, fall in love, and never have to worry about people who measure a person's worth by money. That's why I never told you about Bennett Holdings. Money can protect a person, but it can also make the wrong people notice you. I knew someone would eventually come for the land. And when they did, I knew they would look at you and see a woman who had inherited a little diner. Let them. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest protection you can have. But there is something I need you to remember. The land isn't your inheritance. The diner isn't your inheritance. The money isn't your inheritance. Your inheritance is the courage to stand up when someone tries to take away what you love. If that day ever comes, don't become cruel. Don't become like them. Use what I left you to protect people who don't have the power to protect themselves. And Claire, Don't spend your life hiding. Love. Mom. Claire couldn't hold back the tears. She pressed the letter against her chest. For years, she had believed her mother had left her a diner. Now she understood. Her mother had left her a choice. 3 days later, the entire town gathered at the community hall. Daniel arrived with his attorneys. He still believed he could control the room. Until Claire walked in. She wasn't wearing her diner apron. She wore a simple dark suit. No jewelry. No designer handbag. Nothing that announced wealth. She didn't need it. The room fell silent. Claire stepped toward the microphone. Daniel sat in the front row. She looked at him. Then at the families who had spent months wondering whether they would lose their businesses and homes. I know many of you were promised money. Several people nodded. You were told this project would bring jobs. Maury nods. You were told your property was worth very little. Claire paused. That was a lie. Daniel stood. This meeting is a joke. Claire continued. He wants you to believe this is about development. Daniel's voice rose. Because it is. Claire turned toward the screen behind her. A map appeared. Then another. Then the original property records. The audience began murmuring. Claire pointed to the map. This is what they told you they were buying. Another map appeared. And this is what they actually needed. The entire room became silent. The difference is the reason they were willing to lie. Daniel's attorney stood. This is irrelevant. Claire's attorney answered. Actually, it's the center of the case. The screen changed. Bank transfers appeared. Payments to Elliot. Forged documents. Property records. Dates. Names. One by one. Daniel's carefully constructed empire began collapsing in front of everyone. Then Elliot stood. Claire looked at him. He walked toward the microphone. I helped prepare the documents. The room erupted. Daniel shot to his feet. Elliot. Elliot turned toward him. I should have stopped you. Daniel's face turned red. You're destroying yourself. Elliot shook his head. No. He looked toward Claire. I already did that. Daniel turned toward Claire. You think you've won? Claire looked at him. Yes. He laughed bitterly. You'll spend the rest of your life dealing with people like me. Claire smiled. Maybe. She stepped closer. But I won't spend the rest of my life being afraid of them. Daniel stared at her. For the first time he understood. The woman he had called just the cook had never been powerless. She had simply refused to show him her power. And that was the mistake he couldn't undo. Months later. The redevelopment project was cancelled. The investigation into the forged documents continued. Several property owners were able to keep their businesses. And the diner stayed exactly where it had always been. Same booths. Same counter. Same bell above the door. But Claire changed one thing. She removed the old sign that said, Bennett Diner, and replaced it with Rose's Place. Martha stood beside her as the new sign was lifted into place. You think your mother would like it? Claire smiled through tears. She'd complain about the spelling. Martha laughed. She probably would. Claire looked through the window. The diner was full. Families were eating. Children were laughing. An elderly couple sat at the counter sharing a slice of pie. For the first time in years, Claire felt completely at peace. Then Martha noticed something. Claire. What? She pointed toward the photograph of Rose hanging above the counter. There was another envelope tucked behind the frame. Claire froze. She pulled it out. Her mother's handwriting. One final message. Claire opened it. Inside was only one sentence. If they ever call you just to cook again, remember that I once started with nothing too. Claire laughed through her tears. She finally understood. Her mother hadn't wanted her to become a billionaire. She hadn't wanted her to become powerful. She had wanted her daughter to understand that her worth had never depended on how much money she possessed. Claire folded the letter carefully. Then she looked around the diner. The place her mother had built. The people she had protected. The life she had almost lost. And she whispered, "Thank you, Mom." That evening, Claire locked the diner and stood outside beneath the glowing sign. For years, she had thought she was protecting her mother's memory. Now she realized something deeper. Her mother had been protecting her. The fortune had never been the greatest secret. The hidden company had never been the greatest inheritance. It was the lesson Rose had left behind. Sometimes the people who underestimate you are giving you the greatest advantage of all. Claire smiled, turned off the lights and walked home. The diner remained behind her. Not as a symbol of wealth. Not as a piece of valuable land. But as proof that some things are worth more than money. And somewhere beyond the quiet streets of Hawthorne, the woman everyone had once called just the cook finally stopped hiding. If Claire's story touched your heart, tell us in the comments what country you're watching from. We would absolutely love to know where our Velvet Twist Stories family is joining us from. And if you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Velvet Twist Stories and turn on notifications, because there's always another twist waiting just around the corner.